Welcome to the debate. Today, we are dissecting a Thursday in February 2026 that will likely be etched in the history books as a real turning point for two NBA franchises. The trade deadline is passed, and it delivered a genuine shock to the system. Anthony Davis is now a Washington Wizard.
And I am, frankly, still staring at the transaction log, trying to make the math and the basketball logic add up. It is a blockbuster in every sense of the word, but maybe not for the reasons people usually think of.
It is a massive move to process. So before we get into the implications, let's just establish the facts for everyone so we're all on the same page. The Dallas Mavericks have sent Anthony Davis, D'Angelo Russell, Jaden Hardy, and Dante Exum to the Washington Wizards. In return, the Mavericks get Chris Middleton, A.J. Johnson, Malachi Branhelm, Marvin Bagley III, a 2026 first-rounder via OKC, a 2030 protected first-rounder from Golden State, and 3 second-round picks.
A huge exchange of bodies and future capital, and let's be honest, a significant amount of baggage on both sides. I mean, when you look at the names involved, it reads like an all-star roster from 2021 mixed with a G League showcase.
That's a harsh, but maybe an accurate way to put it. But the central question we are debating today is this. Does this trade represent a brilliant accelerated rebuild for Washington and a necessary, adult-in-the-room financial reset for Dallas? Or is it, as you seem to be suggesting, just a catastrophic miscalculation of value that sets both franchises back? I'm arguing that this is a win-win. Washington has successfully pulled off what we call the flip to become an instant contender next season, while Dallas made the only responsible move they could to pivot fully to the Cooper Flag era.
And I just see it through a much harsher lens. I believe Washington is buying fool's gold, mortgaging all their flexibility for injury-prone stars who are currently in street clothes. And Dallas? I think they've just cemented the legacy of the original Luka Doncic trade as a basketball tragedy. They accepted a return that one scout literally called a bag of chips.
Okay, I understand the skepticism, especially given the history there in Dallas. But let me lay out my position on why this is a strategic masterstroke, particularly for Michael Winger and the Washington front office. We have to look at this not just as a trade, but as an asset management exercise. Washington has landed Anthony Davis, who is still a top-tier talent when he's right, and paired him with Trae Young. But the masterstroke isn't just who they got, it's who they kept. They didn't give up Alex Sarr. They kept Kaishan George. They kept Bilal Coulibaly. They kept all their own premium draft picks. They've basically converted the old assets of Beal and Kuzma into a core of Trae Young and Anthony Davis without, sacrificing their entire youth foundation. That is having your cake and eating it too?
That sounds lovely in theory. But my position is you're confusing names with actual value.
How so?
In the sense that Washington is collecting distressed assets and pretending they're in mint condition. My argument is really based on the valuation failure. We have to look at the sheer destruction of asset value on the Dallas side. First, it is startling. 1 year ago, the Mavericks traded Luka Doncic, an arguably top 5 player in the world, to get Anthony Davis. Now? They've turned Anthony Davis into Chris Middleton's expiring contract, Marvin Bagley, and a pick from OKC that's likely going to be the 30th pick in the draft. So if you trace the lineage, they turned Luka Doncic into Max Christie, Marvin Bagley, and some late draft picks. That is a failure of historic proportions. And for Washington, you call it a masterstroke? I call it extreme volatility. You're pairing Trae Young and Anthony Davis. Neither of them is playing right now. Davis has a hand injury. Trae hasn't played since December. You're building a foundation on quicksand. Winning the trade isn't just about clearing cap space. It's about acquiring players who, actually play basketball.
I think you're focusing too much on the now and not enough on the next. But let's dig into that because I think you're undervaluing the potential of this new Washington Wizards team. So let's move to our first core point. Is Washington a contender or a pretender? You call it quicksand, I call it the most lethal pick-and-roll combination the East has seen in years. I mean, think about the on-court fit for the 2026-27 season. You have Trae Young, who is statistically one of the best lob passers in the history of the game, and you're pairing him with Anthony Davis, perhaps the greatest lob threat of his generation. That synergy alone guarantees you a top-tier offense.
Offense? Sure. Offense has rarely been the issue with Trae Young teams.
It's the other end of the floor where, the bleeding happens.
Exactly. And that is where this trade is so brilliant. It's the defensive synergy that fascinates me. You pair Davis with the rookie standout Alex Sarr. Sarr has already shown elite rim protection instincts. So all of a sudden, you have this block party front court, 2 7-footers with mobility who can erase mistakes at the rim. This structure lets you hide Trae Young's defensive limitations in a way Atlanta never could. This effectively ends the whole deconstruction phase of their rebuild. They aren't waiting for 2030 anymore. They're trying to do what Utah attempted, tank 1 year, which they are, and compete immediately the next. They have shooters like Trey Johnson and Keyshawn George spacing the floor. I think this makes them a legitimate top 4 seed in the East next year.
I'm just not convinced because that whole line of reasoning completely ignores the durability factor. We have to look at the medical reality here. You're talking about Anthony Davis like it's the 2020 bubble. It's 2026. He has played 29 games this season. He is currently out with ligament damage in his hand. Trae Young's been out for months with knee and quad issues. So you're suggesting they're a top 4 seed? But let's look at the cost. You're paying Davis $58.5 million next season. He has a player option for $62 million the year after. If he plays 65 games, sure, maybe they're a 4th seed, but his entire history suggests he won't. Washington is building a Frankenstein roster. It looks amazing on a spreadsheet or in a video game, but in the real world, you're paying over $100 million combined to 2 guys who are currently wearing suits. That just cripples your ability to build any kind of depth.
But that's exactly why the price was so low. You have to understand the market mechanics. That is the arbitrage opportunity. If Anthony Davis was healthy and playing 70 games a year, he would have cost you Alex Sarr and 3 unprotected firsts. Washington got him for expiring contract and salary filler. They bought a Ferrari with a flat tire for the price of a Honda Civic. If they can fix the tire, if he plays 50 games and is healthy for the playoffs, that is a steal. You win championships by taking calculated risks on talent, not by playing it safe.
Or it's a trap. A Ferrari with a flat tire is just an expensive lawn ornament if you can't drive it. And this leads to that Utah flip you mentioned. Utah tried this fast rebuild, and they just stalled out in mediocrity. The risk here is that Washington becomes too good to get a high lottery pick, but too injured and too expensive to actually contend for a title. That is the mediocrity treadmill, and it is the worst place you can be in the NBA. You end up paying a luxury tax bill just to be the 8th seed. That's a fireable offense.
The alternative is losing forever, which they've been doing for years. You have to take a swing eventually. But let's pivot to Dallas because you were very harsh on their return. I want to defend the Dallas front office, specifically the post-Nico Harrison regime. I know it's a difficult position to defend if you just look at the players, but you have to look at the financials. We have to talk about the second apron.
The dreaded second apron.
Exactly. For our listeners who might not be CBA experts, the second apron isn't just a tax, it's a team-building straitjacket. It freezes your draft picks 7 years out. It prevents you from aggregating salaries in trades. It takes away your mid-level exception. Dallas was staring down the barrel of those penalties with a roster that wasn't winning. They had to, eat their broccoli. They had to take the loss to fix the books. By moving AD and D'Lo, they cleared between $50 and $70 million in future salary. They are now $7.5 million below the tax line. They reset the timeline around Cooper Flagg, who's a 19-year-old phenom, averaging over 20 points as a rookie. Sometimes you have to take the medicine to get healthy, and that's what Dallas just did.
I appreciate the eat your broccoli metaphor, but this feels more like starvation. I agree they had to move him, and I get that the second apron is terrifying. But my issue is with the return value. You cannot tell me this was the best offer on the table. Let's look at the draft capital, because first-round pick can be so misleading. The OKC pick they got is probably going to be the 30th pick in the draft. In terms of value, that's basically a second-rounder. You're drafting a backup point guard, best case.
It is still a first-round asset.
Barely. And look at the Golden State 2030 pick. It's top 20 protected. That is massive. That means if the Warriors miss the playoffs that year or if they're just mediocre, that pick doesn't even convey as a first. It converts to a second-rounder. They didn't even get one unprotected swing at the plate. Analysts gave this trade a mid-grade, and I think that's being incredibly generous. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a capitulation.
But it's about the cap space. The cap space is the asset. They can now go into free agency or facilitate trades next summer without handcuffs.
Cap space doesn't rebound, my friend. Cap space doesn't guard the perimeter. They gave away D'Angelo Russell and Jaden Hardy, guys who at least have a pulse on the court, for free in this deal, just to dump salary. This was a desperate salary dump that wasted the very last tradable asset they had from the Luka era. Patrick Dumont, the new owner, might be happy saving the tax money, but the fans are watching a team that just got significantly less talented.
I think you're underestimating the value of a clean slate. Keeping an expensive, injured, 32-year-old Anthony Davis did not fit the Cooper Flag timeline. Davis is eligible for an extension. He wants long-term money. Does it make any sense to pay a 35-year-old Davis $60 million when Flag is just entering his prime? Of course not. Dallas made the hard choice. They stripped it down to build it back up the right way.
If cynical situation for the rest of this season. We're looking at an oddity where both teams are, for all intents and purposes, incentivized to lose every single game for the next 2 months.
How do you mean?
Well, Washington isn't going to play AD or try. It would be malpractice to play them and risk messing up their own draft pick. They need to preserve their tank for a top 4 pick. Dallas, on the other hand, absolutely needs a high lottery pick to pair with Flag. So we are looking at a product on the floor that, quite frankly, is going to be unwatchable. It is a race to the bottom.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. It's strategic alignment. It's smart management. Look at the 2026 draft class. If Washington can get a top 4 pick, they could add a Cam Boozer or a similar prospect to a core of AD, Trey, and Sar. That's a potential championship nucleus. For Dallas, losing now helps them retool faster around Flag. It's ugly for 2 months, yes, but it could pay dividends for a decade. Why fight for the 10th seed?
I agree with the logic of it, but there's a shadow winner here we haven't even mentioned, the Charlotte Hornets.
Right, the 2027 pick.
Exactly. Charlotte owns Dallas's 2027 pick, top 2 protected. By stripping this roster down to the studs, Dallas has arguably made that pick so much more valuable for Charlotte. Dallas isn't going to be good next year either. They are handing a potential top 5 pick to Charlotte on a silver platter. That is a massive, massive risk. If Dallas is bad again next year, which they likely will be, they are essentially outsourcing their rebuild to another team.
That is a fair risk assessment, I'll grant you that. But Dallas is betting on Flag and their huge cap space to accelerate that timeline faster than you think. They can be players in free agency this summer. They believe in their ability to recruit.
I want to go back to the distressed asset idea you mentioned for Washington. There is a culture fit element here that we're just ignoring. You're bringing in D'Angelo Russell, who was just thrown into the trade, and an unhappy Anthony Davis to a very young locker room. We've seen the chaotic energy with these types of players. I mean, you remember the Jackson Hayes incident with G Wiz the mascot? It's almost a metaphor for the circus that can surround some of these situations.
The mascot incident?
Yes, Jackson Hayes hip-checking the Wizards mascot G Wiz during a game. It seems ridiculous, but it speaks to a lack of seriousness, the chaotic vibes that can creep in. You're dropping that energy into a locker room with Bilal Coulibaly and Alex Sarr, impressionable young talents. Are we sure Anthony Davis, who has forced his way out of teams before, and D'Lo are the mentors you want? Washington has worked hard to build a culture of development. This threatens to turn it into a reality show.
I think that's reading a little too much into the noise. D'Lo is likely a flip candidate himself. He isn't a cornerstone. The reality is, Washington got Anthony Davis for expiring contracts like Chris Middleton and Marvin Bagley, guys who are not part of the future anyway. This is a classic low-risk, high-reward move. If it fails, they didn't give up their own future. They still have their draft capital. They can just let AD's contract expire or trade him again. If it works, they are a contender. The downside is purely financial for the owner, not structural for the team.
The downside is opportunity cost. While they're paying AD and Trey to rehab, they aren't developing a cohesive system for the young guys. They're creating a hierarchy where the stars don't even play. That is so dangerous for a team's culture. And frankly, with that cap space, they could have just absorbed bad contracts for more picks or signed younger players who actually fit the timeline.
But they have been at the bottom. They are trying to get out of the mud. You can't rebuild forever. At some point, you have to acquire talent. even if it comes with some dents and scratches. You have to be opportunistic. This was their moment.
You acquire talent that plays. Avdia played, Porzingis played. This just feels like name chasing. It feels like buying a designer jacket that's 2 sizes too small just because it was on sale.
All right, let's bring this to a close, as we clearly view the risk profiles here very differently.
We certainly do.
So to summarize my position, Dallas successfully ripped the Band-Aid off a failed era. They admitted the mistake, they cleared the books, and now they are building properly around Cooper Flag, without the burden of the past or the restrictions of the second apron. Washington, meanwhile, capitalized on a depressed market to build a fascinating, high-ceiling roster for 2027 without sacrificing their youth. It's a bold gamble, but one worth taking.
And I will maintain that while the books are cleaner in Dallas, the asset management was atrocious. They let a superstar asset depreciate into, well, nothing. And for Washington, I see the vision, I do. But I think relying on the health of Anthony Davis and Trae Young is an incredibly fragile foundation. They are buying names, not sustainable production. It feels like a shortcut that leads right to a dead end.
It is certainly going to be one of the most interesting experiments to watch next season. Whether it results in a parade or another teardown, all eyes will be on DC.
It will be interesting, I'll give you that. And we should reflect on the historical weight of this. This trade basically cements the Luka Doncic deal as an all-time blunder for Dallas. It's over. The books are closed on that chapter, and it's a tragedy for that franchise.
A tragedy for the past, perhaps, but a clean slate for the future. We encourage our listeners to evaluate this trade not just on the players swapped today, but on the timelines chosen by both franchises. Thank you for listening to The Debate.